The Black Wolf by Silvio Schneider. Prologue. Can hunger make a thief? AD 1166, 4th August.
Get that scumbag!
Has he been at it again? He even tried to tamper with the weapons this time.
I told ya, there's a demon in that child.
It was still only the shouts that reached the boy. With his right arm he propped himself off the fence and swung over the waist-high obstacle to prevent it from being their grips after all. Under his left arm he had a stick of bread and a piece of salami clamped against his body. One of his more chubby pursuers stopped in front of the fence and started digging at the bunch of keys to open the gate to this garden. Although when the key was inserted and the lock opened with a click, his pursuit came to a sudden end here, because the boy had long since disappeared around the next corner. Of course, he could have followed the angry shouts of the other villagers, but would have, will, and could were rather broadly defined words, and all the broader when opportunity arose. After all, one was not robbed oneself, so where exactly was the problem? Ingratitude is the world's reward anyway, so the first one, shaking his head, threw with his hands away and turned back. But then there were the others. Or the other. A youngster among them who was still in the militia, and the boy on the run knew him. He was just a handful of years older than him and yet was already allowed to carry a short sword. Not the fine virtuosium that the soldiers of the consecrated blade used, to be sure, but iron all the same. And this youngster thought to himself that it would probably be best to finally hunt down the fugitive. For what if he really possessed demonic powers, as rumors say? Firstly, such danger was not allowed to live, and secondly, if it was banished, by him of course, he would certainly be accepted into the ranks of the consecrated blade. Why, even Thorin would likely look down on him with a smile. There was just this one problem. All the leather armor he wore along with the weapon made him quite heavy, and the marauding rascal there in front of him, who just deftly slid under a cart in one go, he wore nothing but a loose shirt and a pair of cloth-laced trousers tied to his boots. That, and his stolen goods, was probably all he had to carry. In the end, however, it was no use. Teeth had to be clenched. After all, the soldiers of the consecrated blade did not grumble about such trifles either. And with such summoned power of his mind, he managed to hurry around the cart and soon caught up with the boy again. It was clearly the one from the times before. He had the same distinctive scar that ran from the bridge of his nose across his left eye to his jaw. Even the aura he possessed was somehow unmistakable. Evil. Yes, that's all he could be, in cahoots with Sanctor's enemies. "Hector! Child! Don't be foolish!" he heard an adult shouting behind him.
Get him!
Another bellowed.
Don't you do this alone!
Yet another. He could understand why even some of the grown-ups were afraid, about him as well. After all, not everyone had what it took to become a soldier of the consecrated blade. Some were good at things like tilling the field and others wielding the sword to protect the land. And his was already drawn. As his father had often said, once the sword was drawn, it had to see whatever will it was drawn with through. They had just passed the last house now. Only forest would follow. With his free arm, the robber now grabbed bundles of brushwood leaning against the cottage wall and threw them in his path. But before one of them could touch him, he had already cut his way through with his sword. Well, that's how it looked like in his mind at least. True, the sword cut through the first branches, but the met resistance was then too great, so that Hector stumbled backwards and fell to the ground. Gritting his teeth, he lay there. Just a few seconds, but his chest ached and he longed to just stay there. The muscles of his legs quivered, his side stung, and sweat beaded from his forehead, making tracks through dust and dirt clinging to it. This feeling of being dirty was too repulsive to him. Only Thorin's adversaries could love such things. And this robber, this rascal, he was probably only so fast because nothing was sacred to him. The youngster grumbled, even growled. No, he couldn't give up now. The bastard has already gotten to a greater distance. He had to get up now. Using the short sword as a prop, he pulled himself back to his feet. Just then he saw the fugitive disappear behind the first group of trees into the forest. "Don't go in there!" the call echoed behind him as he followed. "There are wolves there!" However, the warning only reached his ears, but not his mind. Minutes must have passed by now. He had stopped. His breathing was rapid, his gaze swept. Then he tilted his head to catch a possible suspicious noise. He did not want to walk another meter anymore. He just couldn't, and there was no sign left of the thief. Thorin couldn't possibly be angry with one in such a case. He simply couldn't. It would be unfair. He was already nauseous after all, and he could feel stomach acid fighting its way up his throat. He gasped, as he had to go down on one knee. His breath whistled. Only one thing left that could help. Next time he would set a trap, easy to reach loot. And when the robber comes to snatch it, it will be him who gets snatched. Yes, that's exactly how he would do it. But before that, the first thing to do was to return to the village and get the news of the... Ah yes, he had to admit defeat this time. Honesty was a virtue, and virtues were important to Thorin as well. Sighing, he lifted his head and tried to make out something through vision blurred by tears. He knew he was in the Black Forest, a forest full of evergreens. Although he had no doubt that he would find his way back to the Boar village, he couldn't help but wonder where the robber went. How did he get around here? He couldn't have come that far. Maybe there was a hiding place nearby. He sat up and took notice. A hiding place with more of his kind? What if he managed to track that down and... That was unthinkable. Then they simply would have to take him in at a consecrated blade. Yes, that's what it's all about. Never to give up. Never! He groaned in pain. Something had hit him abruptly from behind. The impact was so strong that he had fallen chest first to the ground. Something was on top of him. Now it was pulling his right arm in such a way up his back that he, in pain, instinctively released the blade from his grip. He cursed. For once. For surely it was that bastard of a robber. Surely he had been helped and he himself had walked right into an ambush. But then suddenly there was nothing. No weight on his back and no pain. Something rustled in the leaves. He straightened to his feet immediately, but only got on his knees. For in front of him he saw the robber, with his sword in his filthy mitts. "You will pay for this, you wretch!" Hector's breath stuck in his throat. He only now realized why the thief had his back turned to him. There was a huge boar standing right in front of them. How could he have not noticed the animal? Not only had he not heard the robber coming, but that too? And it was even worse. The animal had white foam around its mouth. The sign of evil which he had been warned about so often when he had gone to play in the forest. He felt his knees go weak, his breath began to flutter and his body to tremble. He never thought himself to be really afraid of death. But now sheer panic gripped his heart, for he had heard that terrible ways of dying awaited those who merely came into contact with such creatures. The child before him, however, stood there, calmly, with his sword in his hands, his head held high and on firm feet. Then the boar rushed towards them with a screaming screech that could cut into one's hearing. The child remained silent. In its face, however, Hector saw such focus, such absolution, that from that second on he knew, whatever might be in the boar, something rested within the boy that simply devoured such things.